This series is written chronologically. If you are new to the series, you must start at Season 1, Episode 1. Thank you. The Blood Drawn Chronicles, Season 5, Origins Unveiled, was written by Michael Bradley and produced by DigiFox Studios. If you'd like to contribute towards our next season, titled Season 6, Symphony of the Osprey, please visit www.patreon.com/TBDC and take advantage of the awesome perks we have available. We want to take this time to thank Lord Saunders from www.lordsaunders.com for the wonderful audio mastering of the episode you're about to enjoy. As always, thank you for listening, and now our story begins.
Now 6 hours passed the early Sabbath morrow since I began in my pursuit of truth. For a third time I entered the room of Mr. Myrick. Twice he had abated questioning during our sessions, thus I hesitated waiting this long to visit him once more. 8 hours was the record so far for what I called serum stubbornness. 8 hours before having to administer the patient with my anti-serum.
Anti-serum, sir?
Yes, Mr. Finley. Though I stated before that C967 does indeed, in fact, stay in the body for 24 hours, the truth is, the human mind cannot sustain itself under the effects of my serum for that long.
What would
happen? Simple. Remember the onion? Well, C967 would peel said vegetable until there was nothing left but a vegetable.
Good God! And 8 hours was the longest anyone has ever gone?
A manic murderer/rapist named Eustace Greedley held said record.
I remember hearing that name somewhere. Wasn't that...
The Carriage Reaper?
Yes. As I recall, he was accused of the murders of over 12 people.
The 23, actually.
You really treated him, sir?
Along with many other just as gravely deranged lunatics of equivalent caliber.
If I may, sir, I recall hearing that he only targeted couples. Disguising himself as a coachman, he lured innocent young lovers into his carriage, drove them to empty derelict locations, and then
he would stop and enter the carriage wearing a ghostly mask. He murdered the males and raped the females.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, he would bury both bodies and
he would bury the women alive. What are you trying to get at, Mr. Finley?
Well, sir, you said 23 victims. If he only attacked couples, wouldn't it be 24?
It would, and in fact it should have been, if not for his last victim digging her way out of her grave. She was the reason he was finally caught.
Incredible! Why has the public never heard of this girl's marvelous courage?
Because, my dear scribe, she was none other than the Duchess of Rockwell.
Dear Lord!
Precisely. Off the record now. The dear Duchess was on an eventful escape with her secret lover that day. So you see, allowing that to be public news would only taint her otherwise impeccable reputation. After all, in today's day and age, it's quite hard to feel sympathy towards an adulteress, specifically ones of such high outstanding class. Anyhow, back to Eustace Greedley. I recall he was the most tenacious fellow. He truly saw no guilt in the horrible acts he had committed, and thus it took him precisely 8 hours, 4 minutes, and 11 seconds to sing like the birds. Greedley was, and forever will be, my most disturbed patient.
And Mr. Myrick comes in second, sir?
Oh, no, Mr. Finley. Much like Mr. Greedley, Mr. Myrick was in a league of his own. This fact became ever more clear to me not long after my third visit with him. Like a Spanish conquistador in search of the New World, I too searched for the pure truth with the same ambition. And like a conquistador, months aboard a ship floating the surface of an endless ocean, I too felt the urge to find land in what was the vast, raging waters that were the uncharted rivers of Mr. Myrick's psyche. Regretfully, instead of lively land at the end of that wretched creek, I found death. He laid on his bed, strapped and shackled, as ever so before, yet it seemed he found freedom.
I beg your pardon, sir.
He was cold. Not the kind of cold like when one endures a winter without a warm fire. No, this was the kind of cold, the kind of still, the kind of emptiness one witnesses in others when the soul has left the body.
Are you saying Mr. Myrick was dead?
Yes and no. His flesh was cold and pale, his muscles were stiff, his eyes were shut. No heartbeat, no expelling air coming from his lungs, nor even moisture around his lashes.
So he was dead?
Yes.
Then why the no?
The no, Mr. Finley, came later. I exited his cell in haste to the warden's quarters. After informing the warden of Mr. Myrick's departure, I excessively requested immediate removal of Mr. Myrick's body. I had never seen an inmate fall in the way Mr. Myrick did. Thus, I concluded that whatever killed Mr. Myrick may have been, in fact, infectious. When my colleagues pressed me for answers as to the cause of fatality, all I could murmur was werewolf venom.
Right. I noted you mentioning him telling you that. What followed, sir?
At my insistence, instead of waiting until the morrow, the removal team entered his cell within the hour.
What is it, sir?
What they came to find within that hour was an alive and awake inmate number 18317.
Alive?
Yes, so alive, in fact, that the very warden himself graced him with a personal, private meeting. They spoke alone for what appeared an eternity to me back then. My successful persistence toward the immediate removal of Mr. Myrick's corpse was predicated on the fact that I had purposely degraded the intellect of anyone questioning me in order to have it done so. I recall telling the warden that he would be sorry beyond measures his less intuitive mind would be capable of grasping if he didn't rid Elkabar of Myrick's corpse. And now he was speaking it to the very said corpse that I assured him without reasonable doubt was dead. And I knew exactly the topic of said private conversation.
Mr. Myrick, he made you cry wolf.
Worse, Mr. Finley, he made me cry werewolf. I was made the laughingstock in front of my peers by Mr. Myrick in a final move that granted him checkmate in this game I had started.
What happened next, sir?
The warden exited his cell, and in an act of spite, disguised as courtesy, he took me back into his quarters where we spoke. Wasting no time after the doors in his room closed, he restricted me further access to Mr. Myrick, as he put in his own words, saying that perhaps the job had become too much for me to handle. Mr. Myrick's case papers, along with my anti-serum, were immediately handed over to a rival colleague of mine, Dr. Charles Whatley. Whatley was, in better of personal opinion, a doctor who was too rooted in favor of rather archaic methods of treatment. After hearing the warden's delivery of recent events, you'd think I'd be packing my belongings, yet I'd like to think it was my outstanding reputation and not shameless groveling that allowed me to continue to treat Miss Allura. An entire career as king of the Pewter Palace was rinsed away like a Yes, scribe.
My apologies, sir. It's just, well, how exactly was Mr. Myrick capable of accomplishing such a marvelous miracle as resurrection?
At the time, I didn't know. Only a couple things seemed certain for me. First, I still had Miss Allura, and second, 18 hours still remained before my serum's effect ended.
Even after the warden's instructions, you were still going to see Mr. Myrick?
It was a matter of principle. Mr. Myrick thought he had won. It was good to let him think that way.
You had a plan then, sir?
Indeed. First, Miss Allura. She was the key to finding out the secret behind the mysterious Mr. Myrick.
But, sir, wasn't she completely insane?
Yes, but not if I waited double the time.
6 more hours? That would make the total time
12 hours. A new record, Mr. Finley.
But what about Mr. Myrick?
What about him?
Now that Whatley had your anti-serum, wouldn't it be pointless to go through with...
Keen listening skills, Mr. Finley. The answer is yes. The anti-serum would be a problem when administered to Mr. Myrick. Luckily, both Dr. Whatley and the warden were too doltish to realize I had handed them a vial containing blueberry extract instead of an actual anti-serum.
How? What? When?
Very good question, scribe. The answer is during Myrick and the warden's private meeting. It was during which time that I knew how the outcome would play. I knew that in an act of spite, the warden would give Charles the case. Remember, Mr. Finley, they thought I had cracked under pressure. I needed to use that to my advantage. Did I grovel to remain with Miss Allura? To lesser minds, yes. But to the gifted, well, staying steps ahead of everyone is often such a burden to bear.
Genius, sir.
Yes. Yes, at the time I would have sought after and appreciated congregations of praise. Perhaps I'll find such a thing when I close my eyes for the last time and enter hell.
Sir?
I should have let the game end, Mr. Finley. I should have swallowed defeat, surrendered my king, accepted checkmate. But I didn't. No. Instead, I set the pieces up again and declared a new game. And that, scribe, that's how the massacre of Elkabar began, with a new game. Me playing white this time around, and the king's pawn advancing 1 square as my first move.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like, share, comment, and, most importantly, subscribe. Don't feel like waiting until next week for the next Blood Drawn episodes to release? No problem. You can get access to all the episodes of this season now for just a $5 pledge on Patreon.